At 5 years old, Chris Gardner made the decision that his own life would be different from his stepfather's. Abused as a child, kicked out of his Wisconsin home, Gardner worked his way from homelessness to millionaire, keeping his son by his side the whole time. It was Will Smith who told his story in theaters.
You want something, go get it. Period.
But it's Chris Gardner's real-life message that you can't miss.
Becoming a parent for me was the most important, precious, and loving thing I've ever been a part of in my life.
An incredible hour of honest questions with Chris Gardner. Next.
America, welcome. I'm glad you're here. I am so thrilled. This is the first time that Chris and I have ever met. We've talked to each other several times. I think the first time I talked to you was about a year before the movie came out. They were just starting to shoot it. I was intrigued by your story. I called you, it must have been 6 months after the movie came out, because I saw the movie, and the one scene with Will Smith on the bathroom floor, I know you haven't even really watched the whole movie, have you?
I finally saw it very, very late. I couldn't see the whole thing at one time.
Okay. We'll get into that later. But that one bathroom scene, I felt that to my core. And I watched that movie and I thought to myself, and you remember I called you the next day and I said, you're the kind of guy I want to find to help. You know what I mean? You're the kind of guy that if there's a homeless person out there that is striving and fighting like you were, man, how do we find these people?
You know what, Glenn? There are many of them. It is estimated that 12 to 30% of the homeless people in our country have jobs and go to work every day.
I went with my family to work at a soup kitchen in Connecticut, and we were serving dinner, and you could see the people who were playing the game and working the system. You could see the people who were there because of mental health issues, and you could see the people who were busting their butt and trying so desperately to get out. I mean, it is a tough, tough cycle. Before we get into how you break the cycle, I want to start with where you were, how you got there. Let's start at the beginning. You had no father that was around. You had an abusive stepfather. What does that mean exactly?
Well, that's one of the reasons, Glenn, I'm so happy that I had an opportunity to do the book. The movie, as great as it was about 1 year in my life. I was 28 years old. There were 27 years before that. And the point that I always make to folks is if I didn't get the right stuff the first 27 years, I would have never made it that 1 year. And to your point, sleeping in that bathroom with my son tied on my back, I made that decision at 5 years old. I made a decision that no man was ever going to treat, talk to, or terrorize my children as I was. So you can develop that in a book, but you can't do it in a 2-hour movie.
You know, it is really, I know a lot of people who are in abusive situations and people who have grown up in abusive situations. My mother was abusive in my family. It is extraordinarily difficult. It's easy to say, I'm not going to do that. It's difficult to change the behavior because it's the only behavior you know. It's the pattern that you can fall into so easily. How did you change it? How did you break it?
I made a decision, again, not to get too deep, but I'm developing this concept now for my next book that we're calling spiritual genetics. Now, we all understand genetics. You're going to get your mom's eyes, your dad's nose, nothing you can do about it. But the spirit, the soul of who you're going to become as a person, I believe you can choose. I chose to embrace the light that I saw in my mom. I could have become my stepfather. I could have become another wife-beating, child-abusing, illiterate, alcoholic loser, and a lot of people would have said, well, look where he's from.
Sure.
Poor him. He didn't have a choice. I did have a choice. I chose to embrace the light. And one of the things, Glenn, that I have learned this part of my life is there are so many other people who chose to not become all that crap that was just right here in your face, made a conscious choice. I'm mindful. Just on your point, I met a gentleman a couple of years ago who's the chief of police in his hometown. I won't say the city because I don't want to embarrass him. The guy told me he became a cop because every Friday night he could tell it was Friday because his mother's nose was broken. He became a cop to work on domestic violence issues.
You know, it's my mother committed suicide, alcoholic, abusive, everything else, yada, yada, yada. We all have a story. But for much of my life, up until I was about 31, I thought, speaking of your genetic, spiritual genetics, I thought I was destined to repeat it. I thought, I bought into the lie that you're going to repeat it.
Had to.
And it only...
Didn't have a choice.
Yeah. And
Yeah.
once you realize, I don't have to be this way. I don't have to be miserable. I don't have to repeat this. It is, you know, where you are is not where you've been. Everybody thinks, well, I started here, and now I'm here, and so the trajectory is going here. This has not, the beginning has no meaning.
No.
Unless you give it meaning.
Unless you choose to embrace, accept, settle, compromise, and say, there's nothing I can do.
Okay.
There's a bad word that I use sometimes, Glenn, and it's BS. That's BS. You can make a choice. And that's one of the things that I'm talking with people about around the world right now, is the ability to make a choice, and especially young people.
Let me go back. Dad, abusive. Mom, in and out of jail. You didn't even know. She would just disappear for a while.
Well, my family invented that policy later adopted by the Clinton administration called "Don't ask, don't tell."
Okay.
So many things. It's like, well, don't ask, don't tell.
Okay. All right. And then, if I have the story right, she came back and burned the house down?
She attempted to kill him for beating her. Yes.
And what happened?
And she was returned to prison. And my sister and I were returned to foster homes. And we stayed with foster homes, and we stayed with uncles and aunts and relatives, and we moved from place to place. From place to
Pivot point
place.
for you getting out of that? Was that in the foster system? Was it a pivot point for you, or where were you?
I was too young, Glenn. I was 3, 4 years old. All I remember about that experience is, thank God, I was placed, my sister and I were placed with some dear, loving, gentle people. But the one thing I remember the most about that time is there was this woman who would come and she would make me this candy in a skillet. There was this beautiful woman, she would come from no place, and she would make me this candy with syrup. And it turns out, of course, it was my mom. And we developed this incredible nonverbal communication thing. We could look at each other, and I remember her once looking at me asking, "Do you know who I am?" And I remember saying, "Yes, you're my mama." And that nonverbal communication my mother and I had till this day, and my mom moved to heaven 14 years ago. Till this day, we still have it.
Okay, so then you wanted to become a doctor. You went into the Army?
Well, even before that, no. I wanted to become Miles Davis. Wait,
why not?
Wait. You know what, Glenn? That goes to a very important point. I had one of those mothers who, despite the fact that she had too many of her own dreams denied, deferred, and destroyed, she instilled in me that I could have dreams. But not just have dreams, I had the power and the responsibility. And she told me I could do anything I wanted to do. I made up my mind I was going to be Miles Davis.
What happened on that?
After her hearing me say it for about 9 years, I studied music theory, played trumpet for 9 years. One day we sat down and we had what I call the talk.
Yeah.
And she explained to me, she said, "Boy, you're pretty good with that thing, but you can't be Miles Davis, ain't but one."
Can I tell you something? I love your mother.
Oh,
your mother
man.
is the one. Your mother is the one that I look for every time when I watch American Idol and say, "Where are the parents telling them they can't make it?" We'll be back in just a second.